be November 4th. Our next webinar will be November 4th. Peyton Ho will be, Peyton Ho will be our presenter. He's the program director for the Center for Spirituality and Nature, and his title is Communing with Nature, Small Group Contemplative Practice and Creation Care. That will be November 30. So mark it on your calendars. We'll be getting an email out, of course, to this, but just thought we should give you a heads up. And at this point, let me introduce Jerry Capel, who's the director for the Center for Deep Green Faith, who will then introduce Ragan, and off we go.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jerry Capel. Thanks, Robin. So it is, it's about 7:33. I think some folks might still be logging on, but if you have just joined us, we encourage you to introduce yourself in chat. And we have a conversation this evening with Ragan Sutterfield, who's a priest, an Episcopal priest in, is that the Diocese of Arkansas? Is that what it is, straight up?
Yes, Diocese of Arkansas.
Diocese of Arkansas, and he can call himself a writer. He really can. And he writes, focused at the intersection of faith and ecology. He has a background in birding, permaculture, soil ecology, and he brings that into conversation with philosophy and theology and the Christian spiritual tradition. So he's a great guy to have for Thanksgiving conversation or anything else. His writing has appeared in a variety of places, including the Christian Century, Sojourners, the Oxford American, Plough Online, and the Englewood Review of Books. The author of Wendell-Berry and the Given Life from Franciscan Media. This Is My Body, Convergent Random House, Cultivating Reality from Cascade, and the small collection of essays, Farming as a Spiritual Discipline. So you should catch the import of what we're doing tonight with this conversation. He's now at work with a book exploring humus, not hummus the bean, but humus, I think, the soil, and humility, soil science, and Christian spirituality. This is right down our line, folks. I think everybody who logs into this call would be interested in this intersection of faith and soil. His bio says that he seeks to live the good life with his wife, Emily, and daughters, Lily and Lucia. I'd love to have a conversation about just what that means, the good life. But, and I imagine that to be an interesting conversation with Ragan. But you can look him up at ragansutterfield.com. So tonight we have a conversation of great title, Landscaping for the Peace of Wild Things. So may we unpack that together. We invite your conversation, your question in chat. If you just don't want to do that and you want to raise your hand, we invite you to use the Zoom feature of hand raising, as Robin has pointed out, because what that does is that puts your image at the top of the screen. So that helps us spot you. So with no further waste of time from me, Ragan, you can take it away.
Well, thank you, Jerry, for that introduction and the invitation to be here. And it's good to be with all of you. And I would love to have a conversation as we go forward. I've got some points to present, but feel free to jump in, interject, ask a question. I certainly am not an expert on all things native landscaping, and but I want to bring kind of a theological lens to look at these questions, and hope that can be generative for a conversation that we can have together. So I'm going to start with just a couple of kind of broad theological points that I hope will help guide how we look at some of the practical points that I hope we'll end up with. And to do that, I've prepared just a couple of slides to help us through. And so give me one moment as I share that. And so So hopefully everyone can see that. So I want to frame this from the position of thinking about peace. I think that the concept of peace and shalom, of this total well-being, is really at the center of what we are after as human beings. And unfortunately, so often we go after that desire through means of violence, as we of course see in all kinds of ways in our world. But I as I've thought about this, I keep coming back to this poem by Wendell Berry. And I think that Wendell Berry names in this poem something that is a theological truth. And not just a nice sentiment, but something that's really much deeper than that. So I thought we could start by just hearing that poem, and I'll read it as best I can, not as well as Barry does, but I recommend for you, if I had better technical skills, I'd do this, but if you go to On Being, that podcast or radio show, they have a recording of Wendell Berry reading The Peace of Wild Things. So I suggest you listen to that sometime. But let me go ahead and read it for us. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free. This is a poem that I met a woman who's actually a book reviewer for the Washington Post in a coffee shop outside of DC once, and I was working on my book Wendell Berry and the Given Life at that time, and I had a big stack of Wendell Berry books, and she said, "Oh, Wendell Berry," she said, "The Peace of Wild Things is my religion," and and I don't think it's a bad start. So what is the theological truth that's in this? When we think about the creation story that begins in the Bible with Genesis 1, we are hearing a kind of telling that is a counter narrative or counter mythology to a lot of what was being circulated in the water of that day. And this is an image from of Marduk and Tiamat. Forgive me, I'm not great on my Near Eastern languages, but if you have a different pronunciation, I'd love to hear it. But this is from the Babylonian creation myth, and essentially, I won't go into the whole story, but essentially the world is created by Marduk, this god, killing Tiamat, as you can see here, and dividing her body, and that becomes the sky and the earth. So it's a myth in which the origin of the world begins in violence. And this isn't even the first act of violence in that whole history. And of course, there was also in the Roman myth of how Rome came to be, there's the story of Romulus and Remus, and in order for the city of Rome to come into existence, we have Romulus killing Remus. So we have these, whether it's the story of the world or the story of the great city of Rome, these mythologies that have violence at their center. And violence is how we get into the peaceful existence that we find. And the biblical writers want to offer a counter narrative to that. And so we have Genesis 1, which is this beautiful creation story of harmony and of goodness. There's value in the world. Everything's called good. And that's very different from the kind of Babylonian myths or other mythologies that were present at that time. And then going forward into Roman mythology, Augustine in his great book, The City of God, wants to contrast the Roman mythology that says that kind of the default of the world is violence, that the base structure of the world is violence. And he wants to say, no, instead, that the base of the world is peace, and that violence is an aberration. And so it's important where we think our beginning point is. So how does that connect to landscaping? This is a beautiful image from Hildegard of the 6 days of creation. So one, as we think about what is the world that we're interacting with, one important thing to keep in mind is to think about the value that's there. So oftentimes when we interact with the world, we come to it thinking that there's no value until we add whatever we bring to it. This was something that John Locke, that important Enlightenment philosopher, promoted as he was thinking about what does it mean to own property? How is it that somebody has a right to property? And he said that we gain a right to property by adding value to something, by taking the raw materials of the world and giving them value. And in his argument, basically, he's saying that what we get in the default of the world has no value in and of itself. It's only what we do that gives it its goodness. And I think the biblical story is something that offers a very different view. The world isn't, that we're not given this gift in creation of that's a valueless gift. We're told from the beginning that it's good. And so there's something in that we have to hold holy and sacred. And I think if you're on this Zoom, then you probably don't need any convincing of that. But it's an important thing to keep in mind as we think about landscaping, because there's a lot of value judgments that are part of that process, aesthetic judgments of what's beautiful, what's good, and so understanding that there's some goodness and beauty just from the very beginning is important. So for those who have had some exposure to biblical scholarship, you probably are aware that there's 2 creation stories in Genesis. There's the creation story that begins in Genesis 1, and then there's one that begins a little bit later in Genesis 2, probably written by a different author. And there's a really important verse in that Genesis 2 story that kind of zooms into the Garden of Eden, and we are offered a view of God forming the human being from the soil. And so I don't have it here, but it says that God formed the Adam. It's translated as man, but it really is it's a generic term for human being in Hebrew. And so it's not just the name of a guy named Adam. It's actually the Adam is the human being is formed from the Adamah, the soil, and it's humus soil. It's the agricultural soil, the life-giving soil, because there's 2 different words that are used often in the biblical narrative, apar and adamah. And apar is often translated as dust. So there's some interesting interactions with that, but we won't get into all of that here. So in this passage in Genesis 2:15, we find the Lord God took the Adam, that this creature formed from the humus of the earth, and put him in the garden. So this word "put" is the Hebrew yanach, and there's a biblical scholar, Kristen Stewart, who's written some really good reflections on this, and she says that this term yanach has a peaceful connotation to it. It's not just like God dropped the human being into the garden or something like that, but it's that God like gently lowered down and placed the human being in the Garden of Eden. So there's this restfulness to it, this almost Sabbath presence that's in that term. And then the human being is given a vocation to the way that it's often is translated as to till the soil, to avad it. But avad in Hebrew also can mean to serve. It's often used in other contexts as a word for service. So one way that we could translate this is that the Lord God put the human in the Garden of Eden to serve it and keep it. And that word shamar also has a sense of conserving, of protecting the integrity of something. That's what keeping means. So the way that I like to translate this passage is that the human beings put in the garden to serve and conserve it, or serve and preserve it. And I think that's an important way of framing our vocation, and then to judge how well we live into it one way or another as we go into the world. Okay, so any questions at this point? I'll just jump out here if we'll share again in a moment. Anyone have any questions?
One that prompted from me, you use the word gift, that this is a gift to us. I hear that language all the time. The Book of Common Prayer is full of it. It is, in fact, probably the primary way that creation is related to humankind is as gift. I have asked myself the question, is there actually anything in the Bible anywhere that actually relates creation to humankind as a gift given to us? And I was kind of curious. I haven't done the work, but it's kind of a burning question to me, primarily because in our hymnody, in our prayer, and in our liturgy, that's actually the primary relationship that is presented. Just wondering about your comment.
Sure, that's a really big important question. So, you know, I think that, I mean, my view is very influenced by Wendell Berry, who is not a biblical scholar. I mean, they're a close reader of the Bible, but and certainly deeply influenced by it. But the way that Berry describes who we are in the world is, he says we live given lives in a given world, and so our lives themselves are in some ways a gift, and the world's a gift, but it's not something that we possess. It's something that we participate in. And I think part of our problem is that in so many of our kind of Western capitalist cultures, we don't understand gifts. You know, Lewis Hyde and others have done some really great work on the nature of gift giving, and most traditional societies, gifts are means of social bonding, and they're not a means of exchange, but they're something that we do in order to become a part of one another. And I think that the biblical writers, in the way in which they thought about gift, were much more in line with that. Now, as far as like how they talk explicitly about gift, I think like Psalm 104, there's this idea of human beings like living from the grace and abundance that God offers in creation, and that all creatures actually are dependent upon God for their life, and that when God withdraws from them, they die, and when God brings renewing life to them, they live. That we all are in this dependent relationship on this deeper life force of God. And then in the New Testament, I think that gets worked out, this term grace that's linked with the idea of gift. And I've not explored his work deeply, but I'm really excited about Barclay, his Paul and the Gift, and is a big study of some recent anthropological work around gifts, and as well as philosophical work, and relating that to Paul's understanding of what's happening with grace, and that there's some givenness. But anyway, that's probably as much as I should go.
Yeah, but that's helpful though. I mean, if we can cause ourselves to stop for a second and really ponder what that is, and it is not about possession, then the word gift might actually be useful to us instead of an impediment.
One of the things that Lewis Hyde says is that one of the fundamental aspects of the gift is that it must keep moving. Can't stop it. And how this was just understood in a lot of traditional societies, and we think about our relationships with the world, of that the flow of energy and nutrition, and sorry, I'm in my office in an urban parish. I don't know if y'all hear the sirens, but they're pretty constant around here. So
yeah, and all this, I mean, this could be a whole nother webinar, which would be time well spent. Not this one, but that whole subject would be a great one to explore.
Well, we will have to work on that, Jerry.
Yeah.
Well, if there aren't any other questions now, I want to think about like how. So if this is our call to like serve and conserve creation, how do we move forward with that, and living that out, and accepting the gifts of the world, and how do we welcome the peace of God into the world? So for many, this is sort of the image that they have of peace, of what a peaceful place looks like, and it is in many ways a beautiful manicured lawn, with lots of color variation, and so I don't mean to entirely criticize it, especially if your lawn looks like this. Not mine certainly doesn't, but there is something in this that is part of that tradition, in which we take the gifts of creation and we form them entirely according to our desires and our judgment of goodness, rather than recognizing the goodness that's already there. And so there's something, Wes Jackson, important plant geneticist at the Land Institute, Wes Jackson says that the original sin of humanity is agriculture. um, and it's where we take plants and animals and natural systems and we try to force them into a kind of manufactured abundance. And that's different from the kind of work that people have always been involved with, of what I would call like wildlife management or tending the wild. And there's a book by that title and a great documentary on PBS if you ever want to watch it, especially about California. When the Spanish arrived from Europe to California, many of them described it as a Garden of Eden. They were just amazed at the beauty and the abundance, and but what they didn't recognize always was that that had actually been the result of long tending by the indigenous people of California, who had been actively managing that land, using controlled burns and other means to manage the lands of California, that was enhancing the total abundance of life and in all of the spaces and places that the creatures could be, as well as providing more food and for those people. But with that abundance, but we have tended to, rather than manage the given world in interacting with it and serving and conserving it, serving and preserving it, we've instead so often dominated it, as this picture. So in talking about this presentation beforehand, Jerry mentioned an interest in talking about how we can think differently about this in terms of mission, the mission of, and kind of the gospel of what the church is really about. And one of the documents that's been important for me, and this is something that is it's an Anglican document, Church of England, or all the Anglican Communion. I think it was a Lambeth gathering, but it came up with this the 5 marks of mission. Like, what is the church's mission look like? So they came up with 5 different marks of what this looks like in the world, by which the church joins in the mission of God and the mission of Christ. And number 5 is to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation. And that I think, and to sustain and renew the life of the earth, but that safeguarding the integrity of creation, I think reflects so well that Genesis 2:15 call. And so that is central to our mission. So how do we, in living into that mission, what does that look like that's different from that manicured lawn that we just saw?
Yeah, before we move on, Ragan,
okay.
I want to challenge number 3 on this. From your reading of Genesis 2, we ought to also be responding to all creation's need by loving service and not just human need. And so opening our eyes to how I do not understand these days why we needed to separate 5 out from 3. They're intertwined and they're actually the same action. Why do we continue to do that? Which we do. We seem to need to talk about creation differently than human need and loving service. And so anyway, so just running that by, I find that the more I call that out, the more people kind of go, oh, we most certainly do, don't we? Anyway, so I just wanted to catch that. It was just passing by.
Yes, that's a good point. I just got to skip to 5, but usually when I look at this, because I don't.
Yeah, which is
it's
normal,
the one that grabs me.
That is what we do. Yep.
Yeah. So this, I think, is comparing to this, this is a picture of a lawn designed by Ben Vogt, who I'll talk about a little bit later. He runs a landscape design company in the prairie country, and so this is a lawn that may not look to the aesthetic taste of your typical neighborhood as beautiful in the same way, and we're catching it, I think, at a time when it's not quite as fully in bloom, but this is a place where many more creatures are able to live. That other lawn back here, this is essentially sterile. Looks beautiful, but there's not a lot happening here. The flowers might serve some pollinators, but there aren't very many insects that can live here. And because there aren't very many insects that can live here, there aren't very many birds that can survive on it, especially during breeding season. I've been doing a study of Doug Tallamy's book, Nature's Best Hope, with my church, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But one of my church members said, I moved to this new house in the suburbs, and we had birds all winter, like lots and lots of birds. But then in the summer, we haven't had any birds around. And Tallamy explains that is that birds need insects in order to feed their young. And so they don't nest around places that don't have an abundance of insects. They don't have enough insects to support them. And so this is a place that's not properly living into that call to safeguard the integrity of creation. But this is getting a lot closer. So my vision for how this work of safeguarding, conserving and preserving creation has really been deeply influenced by this book, Nature's Best Hope, by Douglas Tallamy. And he's actually written a number of books. The first one that I read by him was Bringing Nature Home. They all kind of have the same message, which is the importance of looking at ecosystem function in our home landscapes. But what he calls for in this book in particular is to say, we all have a role to play, an important one that we can play out in our own landscapes to create habitat and life-sustaining hospitality to all kinds of creatures. And all it takes is changing the kinds of plants that we use in our landscape. And I know that Jerry just had Tallamy at his church. So and some of you may have been part of those conversations. So you probably have even a better grasp of this than me. But this book gives a really great vision for what Tallamy calls homegrown national park, which is an interlinking of all the people who begin to work with their own landscapes and create a place of hospitality for a variety of creatures, starting with insects. I mean, Tallamy is an entomologist, so he might be a little bit biased, but he is right, I think, in that insects are kind of at the fundamental ground of a whole ecosystem. And of course, insects and plants have a profound relationship. So plants and insects go right together. So what I'd like to do now is to talk about 3 steps that I would of how to live into this vision of really the original vocation that we're called to serve and preserve creation. How do we welcome more creatures into our landscapes? How do we honor the gift and the sacred realities that God has given that we are a part of in creation? So these are taken pretty much straight from Tallamy's book, I want to talk about them in the context of my own church and some efforts that were underway. And we are by no means like the model. This is something that we're working on like as we speak. And so we just wrapped up a conversation about this book during our forum hour, and went and did a native plant garden tour just recently as a church. And we've actually been doing this in cooperation with some other Episcopal churches in our city, so that we're all working on this together and kind of creating some prodding on together. So I want to move to this. So all right, so the first thing you can do, if you want to kind of think about a 3-point action plan, is to remove invasive plants. Now, invasive plants, I should say invasive non-native plants. So there are all kinds of aggressive plants that are not necessarily invasive. They can be balanced out. So for instance, where I live, we have trumpet creeper. It's very aggressive. If I don't weed eat the side of my house about twice every 2 weeks in the summer, like it'll be overrun by trumpet creeper. I let trumpet creeper grow, and I have to keep it, but I have to keep it at bay. But it is a native Arkansas plant, very aggressive vine. But the hummingbirds love it. It has a trumpet creeper sphinx moth that uses it as larval food and for its caterpillars. So it's not an alien invasive, as Ptolemy would call them. But this plant is Nandina, and we have this very sad planting of Nandina on the side of our church. You can see here, and I mean they're not thriving really as plants, but they do produce berries, and so they get spread. It's a very toxic plant. It's very invasive. It's non-native, and so the first step that we are taking is we are removing these Nandina, which are, by the way, very hard to get rid of, and we are replacing them with American beauty berries, which is also a very hardy plant, because this area doesn't get a lot of water. It's kind of gets some sun and some shade, but it's doesn't get a lot of sun. But American beauty berries are very hardy and good with those kinds of conditions, and they do provide a lot more ecosystem function. So that first step is remove invasives. And my daughter took these pictures, by the way, so they're I think she got a little finger on one of those, but okay, so the next step is planting keystone species. So not all plants are the same. There are plants that are better and worse, and keystone species, this is a concept that comes from ecology, where they notice that some plants, some animals have a bigger role to play in an ecosystem than others. So it was actually discovered with starfish in tidal pools in the Pacific Northwest. There was a researcher who was looking at these tide pools, and when this certain starfish was present in the tide pools, there was a greater diversity of life in those tide pools. And when the starfish was absent, less diversity. And so this researcher was able to recognize that there was something about that starfish that was key to the working and functioning of the whole ecosystem. And there are many keystone species where when you take them out of the equation, that things change significantly. Now, every creature has its role to play in the totality of an ecosystem, but there are some that have, like a keystone in a building, that have an important, an oversized function. So oak trees if you're in North America, oak trees are a really important keystone species. They are the host to more kinds of moth and butterfly caterpillar than any other tree species. And because of that, then they're host to all kinds of bird species. And so this is a picture of the front of our church, and we have a large oak tree. And so, of course, we didn't plant this as part of our effort at reconciliation, ecology, or anything. This was just already there. But part of your work will be just to notice and understand what's already in place. And we've got some ground cover and some trees that we'll want to replace eventually, but you don't have to do it all at once. You start with the invasives, the things that are really going to get out and do some harm. But then other things, as they die, as they, you can start to replace them. If any of you are active in a church community, you know that you can't just, come in full scale with a plan and undo everything that's always been there. It's better to kind of do things gradually. It can be a slow conversion process. Everyone's not going to just jump on board, but you can start, especially as things die off, but another way to start is just to notice what's already there and working that you want to keep. And I'll note, going back to this, removing invasives, we also have these honey locust trees, which are native to Arkansas, good nitrogen fixing tree. So we do want to get rid of this Nandina, but we want to keep the locust trees. And then finally, the third thing is to fill in gaps with function. So part of what the aim of our planting should be is to serve a variety of ecosystem functions. Whether it's being a host plant for certain caterpillars, providing seeds for birds in the winter. We want a lot of variety. And so we want to have these different ecosystem functions filled. And so here you see some plantings. We have a wonderful woman who came to our church from Atlanta, and she's a great gardener. And this whole area here is just it's a little bed that borders our parking lot. And there were some pretty sad looking non-native shrubs. And over the last couple of years, we've taken all those out and started to plant in flowers. And we're moving more and more to native black-eyed Susans. These are switchgrasses. We're adding in sedges. And those are increasing the ecosystem function. And just in this little tiny strip along our parking lot, we're actually in the process of trying to look at getting rid of some of our parking lot to increase the area where we can provide more ecosystem function. But just in this little strip, we found praying mantis, and there was a long-tailed skipper, which is kind of a rare butterfly for this area, that actually showed up on St. Francis Day. So there are lots of there's a lot of work that even just a small area can do. And then next, I'm going to talk about some resources for how to do these three things. Couple of books just to look up. This one is really great, especially if you're in an area that has historic prairies, which actually quite a lot of the United States and Canada has, more than you'd think. Like Arkansas, we've got a lot of deciduous forest, and it's a lot like Tennessee or Kentucky, but we do have historic prairies, and so along with a lot of prairie species. So this book by Benjamin Vogt is about the kind of the how-to of how do you design a garden landscape? How do you put in a garden, select the right plants and everything. And so that's a really, really helpful book. He has a company called Monarch Gardens that you can look up, and he has a good newsletter, lots of webinars and things. So he's a good person just to kind of follow his insights. And then this is an interesting one. There's a Japanese horticulturalist, Miyawaki, who created this method for rapid reforestation. And it's basically a way of planting native plants, trees, and understory plants together in a very intensive way, but they kind of work off each other to promote rapid growth. So if you want a forest, we teach the virtue of patience. I preached about that not long ago, but there's also a need to create some ecosystem function as rapidly as well. And so this Miyawaki method provides a way of doing that. So if your church has some more land to work with, it'd be great to look at this as or your community has more land to work with. It'd be great to look at some places, like an empty lot or something like that you could utilize the Miyawaki method. And so this book is a good introduction to that method. And we actually have an electric car charging, solar electric car charging station around the corner from my house that has a little lot that's part of it. And I was walking by there the other day, and I was like, told the owner, I was like, "Are you using the Miyawaki method?" And he was like, "Yes." Like he was glad somebody knew what he was doing. But he's got this Miyawaki forest growing up right in the midst of his solar charging station. So I want to now. I'll stop here for some more questions, and then I'm going to share some web resources that you might want to take a look at. But any questions?
I saw a question go into the chat.
Sorry, I'm not good at multitasking. So
I know I'm supposed to read it and it's not scrolling for some reason. Mine's frozen. Let's see. But somebody, I'm sorry, I don't remember who it is. Maybe was Mackenzie asked if you use pesticides or fertilizers in the work that you're doing at your church. That was the gist of it.
That's a good question. So I do not do, I don't use any pesticide or herbicides, or I use compost. Soil health is a big thing for me. It's actually, I'm just wrapping up a book on kind of theology and soil, and that's something that I think that good soil can actually cure a lot of the problems that we have, both with insect pest and because insects often attack plants that are unhealthy, and then also with so I think working on biological diversity and increasing the number of creatures that are working in the soil to support your plants is the better way to go than using. Now, I will say that Ben Vogt advocates the use of Roundup, and a lot of, if any of you have ever been in conversations with people who do like large scale rewilding projects, like that, it's a controversial topic, but some people will use it because some of these Nandina and other things are so hard to get rid of. people do a limited application of things like Roundup. Now, I prefer other methods, using solarization, where you take like black tarps and cover an area, but it takes more time, and you have to do it throughout different seasons so that you kind of get all the weed seeds out. But I think I don't think we understand everything that's going on with Roundup, but I think from a soil perspective, Roundup is actually originally a chemical for bonding different metals, and it can affect soil biology in more significant ways than we realize. So I'm worried about it for that reason, in addition to a lot of other things. So I think, but there are lots of debates about that in some of the conservation community. So hopefully that covers the question.
Yeah, Talamay actually talked about that this weekend. We kind of had a conversation. I've got a lot of honeysuckle to try to kill. He didn't even flinch at the use of herbicides to kill honeysuckle because things were already out of balance.
Yeah.
So the I think maybe the interesting part of that question from Mackenzie is not, do I do this or don't I, but how would you decide whether to do this or not? By what value, by what information do you make that choice? All right, what's your guiding principle? And anyway,
that's a good one. And I think it's, I mean, in a way, going back to that original like human vocation of serving and conserving the creation, or safeguarding the integrity of the creation. I think the goal is always health and wholeness. And so how do we achieve that? There are times when certain medicines, for instance, are poisons to the body, but they're poisons that are used to restore health and wholeness. And so there's so I think that's always the goal. And I think there are sometimes tragic realities that we have to deal with in our world. So there are times when we might need to, I mean, whether you're using herbicides or pesticides or not, most gardeners know you're still going out there and killing hornworms and things, even if by hand. And so
you're killing. Another principle I want to apply here is humility. Not just the assumed end goal that you assume that you know how it works, but a humility that says use the least possible violence, because you actually don't know how extensive, Roundup is still in debate, right, about how violent it is, and so on. Anyway, so I don't think there's an easy answer.
No.
Yeah.
Robin, you?
Yes, I have a question, or not a question as much as a comment. We live out in the country. We have no lack of nature around us. Sometimes, and lots of oaks, but sometimes we have too much nature. We have a field behind us which used to have all sorts of wildflowers in it. The deer population exploded, and now they have very few wildflowers in it. But we have a fenced-in area where we have some blueberries and fruit trees that I didn't get around to keeping the undergrowth cut down so that I could get in there. And it is flourishing with all sorts of flowers, just milkweed and all kinds of goldenrod that you don't find on the other side of the fence. So what we're intending to do, and we'll see if we can pull it off, is to put in a deer exclosure to keep the deer out so that the field can start to regenerate and the flowers that were natively there, hopefully there's still a seed bed and they will come back. So sometimes we can think a little bit outside of the box, depending on where we are or what needs to be done. And I was thinking when you were talking about wild ecosystem function as the third thing to in your program to fill in ecosystem function gaps, drainage might be a thing you could look at in a church. How do we handle our stormwater, and can the stormwater be used in such a way that we could have a wetland?
Yes.
Or that we could, of course, use it for have an underground storage tank, and then we can use that for gardening, or start thinking even beyond planting. What how can we putting in a permeable? If you have to have a parking lot, what about paving bricks with that aren't totally, or you have some gaps in them, so there's grass and some herbage there? Well, that can permit groundwater recharge. So starting to think, where is our piece of land? What could it do? How could we improve the ecosystem functioning of this place? And then think about the plantings, and there's a lot we could do, I think, just looking at our topography.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think deer is a great, I'm sorry, Ragan. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say real quick, I mentioned our church is looking at some major changes to our parking area, and we're working with this landscape designer, Martin Smith, who's really pioneered a lot of wetland restoration, and we're looking at creating permeable surface and integrating some more kind of wetland type habitats around the edges, and he's taken a lot of places that would just be drainage problems and turn them into really great ecosystems.
Yeah. And just to finish on the deer comment, to Mackenzie's question about pesticides, which are violent, right? They are siding, they are killing, like deer. It's the same question, really. They say in the number one threat to woodlands in the eastern part of the United States is the deer population. There should be 30 per acre, and there's 100, because we have put it out of balance, and we put it out of balance by violence. How much violence is it going to take to restore a semblance of balance? I mean, so just the complexity of her question, really. Do we support the culling of deer populations? Hard on Bambi, necessary for life on Earth, and so on. It's just really tough. And this is where faith comes in a way. By what values, by what faith choices do we decide to support deer hunting?
Yeah.
Or not?
When I think it goes back to, as well, to I think the insight of the Genesis story, that we are going to be involved in it, some sort of active management, one way or another. And oftentimes, we've got a great leader of one of our local Audubon organizations, ornithologist, and he says, native plant landscaping is not just like letting a lot just go, because that's probably just going to be a place filled up with all kinds of invasive species that aren't going to fulfill all these. You really have to take an active role in bringing in diversity, and so it is an active cultivation that we need to take an active role in. Other questions?
No, just one more comment. It struck me early on when you were talking about Genesis 2 and preserving and serving and maintaining the integrity of creation. I like that word. It strikes me, I'm an economist, And it struck me that what we're really talking about is sustainability, and that we are in charge of maintaining the sustainability, the ecological vitality of this garden, and things are out of whack. So thinking about how do we sustain, how we maintain things, and what's necessary to get it to be more sustainable, to get it to be able to function more and more without our having to intervene. I think that gives us a global sense of what we as humans are trying to do, and then we can zero down into our church or our yard or our neighborhood. But it gives us, I think it's important to be able to have that overall vision of what our calling, our vocation as humans is, and then how does that translate into our faith?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think not just sustainability, but flourishing. And but yes. Well, before we run out of time, I want to just share a couple of web resources that I think will be helpful for anyone who's trying to implement this. Sorry, I'm just, yeah, it's good point, Angela. Let's get back to, okay, so this is so Ptolemy actually created this website that I don't know, it hasn't been up all that long, but it's all about his idea of homegrown national park, and it's an increasing place of resources. And I think it's imagine if we had there's this map of places that have who are part of participating in Homegrown National Park. Imagine if all the church communities that we're part of were on this map. I think that'd be really powerful thing. So this is there's a lot of good just information, resources, how to find native plants, directory of lots to explore there. So the other thing to note is there's if you go to the Native Plant Finder, this was actually created by a student of Ptolemy's, and it's a way to find what's the best thing to plant where you are. And so it's registered my zip code, and so you could just look on in different categories and find out what are the best things to plant. So of course, and it shows this in this little window the number of caterpillar species for butterflies and moths that these plants support. So goldenrod 85, and you get down to oaks 420, which is why they're so good. Beech plum, cherry, chokeberries 285. So you kind of see what it ranks them. So you see what it's going to give you the most impact on what you plant. And then I think with some of these you can click in, and it will tell you a little bit more about the different varieties and what kinds of butterflies and moths use them. And then it's hard to, so Audubon has a similar site that's plants for birds, and you just you can look through their native plant database, and but they make you give their email address. So I've already done that many times. But anyway, so not a bad list to get beyond, but just to know about that. And then another program that would be good to look at, because sometimes people need something tangible they can wrap their minds around, is the National Wildlife Federation has the Sacred Grounds program that certifies houses of worship. You can be a certified wildlife habitat. You can do this for your own yard as well. Not through the Sacred Grounds program, but they've got a different designation for wildlife friendly yards. So that's a program that could be a good way to get people energized. So I'll stop there. And Mackenzie, do you want to say something more about the Rewild Your Campus program?
Sure, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Let me try to turn on my video. Yeah, no, I very much agree with what you were saying about Roundup, and our organization, we work with schools to eliminate the use of herbicides and pesticides, but also work to rewild campuses. So go from lawns and do more native prairie and everything that you're talking about. So and we're trying to expand beyond schools and also help all types of campuses like churches as well. So if anyone wants resources on like how to use less chemicals or doing more rewilding, I put the website in, and then the green ground certification is like the reward for campuses that are actually doing this. So if you're trying to get your local school, or hopefully we can expand to churches one day to like, actually do this, you can like tell them about this. And I hope, Ragan, that we could like certify your church, so that would be really awesome. But yeah, just thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and there are a lot of different programs out there, so it's good to kind of find what would be best for you in your particular place. And we also have in Arkansas, we have a Audubon, our state Audubon organization does like a bird friendly yard program, and they just expanded it to houses of worship. And so there's lots of different options, but especially places like what Mackenzie was saying, that can provide some resources and information. Some of them are kind of like you just do a checklist and turn it in and you get get the certification, but some resources would be helpful. Any other questions or comments? I know we're running up against our time.
I kind of want to make a brief comment. And Ragan, thank you so much for your presentation. It's great to be here with some kindred spirits. It seems. I've been really kind of deep diving into this work, not only in places of worship, but where I currently work, this whole rewilding effort. And I just want to speak to the impact that it has as really an embodied ministry. I work with young people that are pretty resistant to any sort of church or faith in community involvement, and yet I'm noticing that when we participate in co-creating wild spaces, there is such a sense of being a participant in nature and not an overbearer of it. And I think it's a felt experience that they come away with that really can transform them. And I think the other interesting thing, I've been kind of reading up on some research on the science of awe. And, obviously nature provides that so much. UC Berkeley's provided some really interesting recent research. And I've seen that occur with young people in these gardens, in these wild spaces that are confronting mystery, that are confronting a sense of transcendence by witnessing flowers and being more attuned to what's happening around them. And these are people that are not involved in any sort of, faith community. So in terms of a spiritual experience for young people, I think this is a very important path, not only for their healing, but for the healing of all creation. So I just wanted to make note of that.
That's a really good word, David. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, wonder and awe are certainly keys to this work, and I think really the fundamental driver of why we do it. Any last words, Jerry?
Oh yeah, I think we're pretty much there. I guess what I'll just say what Talamy's done for me. So he's really opened my eyes, all the stuff that Ragan has just presented, to a very doable way of engaging life. I guess, you know, that the climate thing is so daunting, and all the other, you know, extinction, you know, just all the stuff that we are up against is tempts to despair, and tempts to hopelessness and helplessness and all that kind of stuff. And the thing about nature, you know, the backyard is, you could do this. Any church can do this. You can do it in a patio. You don't have to have access to great swaths of land. You don't have to have a lot of money. So it is a real gift to simply ask the question, you know, I don't know what to do. What can I do? Very straightforward, simple. Some things that can be done. And in churches, it's the same sort of thing. If they don't want to, they don't want to put on solar panels. All right, then let's just take an edge and put in some wildflowers, simply to host some of God's beloved. Just that. And so that, I mean, that's what to me is so beautiful about it, is you could probably strike this conversation up with any group of people or your own self, and come out with something to do. And that's I don't know, seems a blessing to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think of that, small things with great love.
Mhm.
And that's sort of what, I mean, what the call is just, you know, first of all, we're concerning ourselves with small things, insects, as a fundamental part of ecosystems. A lot of what this landscaping is about, but it's a love for small particulars and places that we get to exercise
We
in
do.
the midst of all these gigantic,
We
overwhelming.
don't need a Speaker of the House to plant some flowers. Yeah. So thanks for that. And we'll I think there's much yet I think we could talk about, and we had to drag you back in here and pick up on some related conversations.
Well, I'd love that, and it's been a joy to be with everyone on this call.
Yeah. So everyone, with that, the Lord bless you and keep you, and make his face to shine upon you, and be gracious unto you, and give you peace. And go out to serve all creation, including the human part of it. And so blessings on this evening to everyone, and a good night.
Thank you.